Sat in my truck for a long time before I went inside. The engine was off. The parking lot of the diner was mostly empty. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning, the kind of hour when nobody has a reason to be anywhere except work. I had a reason. I just didn't know what it was yet. The man who'd called me was named Holt, Raymond Holt. I didn't know him. He'd left the voicemail 2 nights before. Calm voice, professional. Said he needed to speak with me in person. Said it was urgent. Said it was about my wife. I assumed she was having an affair. That was the first place my mind went. I'm not proud of that. But we've been married for 16 years, and somewhere around year 12, something had shifted in a way I couldn't name. I'd chalked it up to the kids getting older, to work stress, to the ordinary erosion that happens to people who stop paying close attention to each other. I hadn't gone looking for proof of anything. I hadn't wanted to find it. I'm 51 years old. I own a tile and flooring company that I built from nothing. Literally nothing. A van, some tools, a guy named Pete who still works for me 22 years later. We have 3 crews now. A warehouse, contracts with 3 commercial developers in the county. My wife handled our household accounts. I made the money. She managed where it went. That was the arrangement. That was the trust. I went inside. Raymond Holt was already there, in a corner booth, coffee in front of him, a manila folder on the table that he didn't touch while I was walking over. He was maybe 60, trim, gray at the temples. The kind of man who looked like he'd spent a lot of years listening to things people didn't want him to hear. He stood up when I got close. We shook hands. "Mr. Beaumont," he said. "Thank you for coming." I sat down. A waitress appeared, and I told her just coffee, and she disappeared again. "You said it was about my wife," I said. He nodded. He put both hands flat on the table, not on the folder. "Before I say anything, I want to tell you something directly. I was retained 6 weeks ago. The person who retained me asked me to conduct surveillance on you, to document your movements, your habits, your contacts, specifically to determine whether you were being unfaithful." I stared at him. "The person who retained me," he said, "was your wife." I don't know what I expected him to say. "Not that. She hired you to follow me." "Yes." "For how long?" "The retainer was for 60 days, with an option to extend." My coffee came. I didn't drink it. I was thinking about the last 6 weeks. Every morning I'd left the house, every job site, every lunch I'd eaten in my truck, every time I'd stopped at the hardware store or the gas station or Pete's house to drop off paperwork. Someone had been watching all of it, and the person who'd ordered it was the woman I came home to every night. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He opened the folder then. He turned it around and slid it across the table. "Because of what I found." I looked down. The first page was a bank statement. Not one I recognized. The account number wasn't one I'd ever seen. But the name on it was a joint name, mine and my wife's, attached to a home equity line of credit on our house. Our house. The house we bought 11 years ago in Crestwood, the one with the big oak in the backyard that my youngest had carved his initials into when he was 7. The house I'd worked every weekend for 4 years to pay down. The balance on the line of credit was $238,000. I looked up at Raymond Holt. "She opened an account 14 months ago," he said. "Your signature appears on the application. I've had a handwriting consultant look at it. It's not my signature." "No," he said. "It isn't." I turned the page. There were transfers, monthly, sometimes twice monthly, going into a second account I also didn't recognize. From that account, the money moved again to a business registered in the state of Tennessee, an LLC called Renata Creative Group. I never heard of it. I turned the page again. There was a photograph, taken from a distance, through what I assumed was a long lens, in the parking lot of a restaurant I recognized, an Italian place about 40 minutes from our house that my wife had mentioned once or twice as somewhere she'd been to lunch with friends. In the photo, she was walking toward the entrance with a man I'd never seen before. He had his hand on the small of her back. The timestamp was a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks earlier. I turned another page. There was another photo, and another, and a business registration document for Renata Creative Group, with 2 listed members, my wife's name, and the man in the photographs. His name was listed as co-owner and managing director. She hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been building something. With my money, using a loan she'd taken out against my house with a signature that wasn't mine. I closed the folder. Raymond Holt had been watching me the whole time, quiet, giving me room to process. He said, "I want to be clear about something. I was hired to look at you. I found nothing on you. Nothing. You go to work, you come home, you coach your son's baseball team on Saturdays, you have lunch with your father every other Wednesday. That's your life." He paused. "When I started finding what I found, I made a decision. I'm refunding the retainer in full. What was being done here? I won't be party to it. And I thought you had a right to know." I asked him the question that had been sitting in my chest since he'd first slid that folder across the table. "How long has this been going on?" He looked at me steadily. "Based on the financial records I was able to access, the transfers, the LLC formation, the construction draws on the equity line, I believe it's been active for at least 14 months, possibly longer." 14 months. I drove home. My wife's car was gone. She told me she had a consult in the afternoon. She did some freelance interior design work, small jobs, enough to keep herself busy. That's how she'd always described it. I went upstairs to the room where she kept her home office. I sat at her desk. I want to say that I was calm. I was, in the way that you're calm when something very large and very cold has just closed over your head and you haven't started fighting the current yet. I wasn't panicking. I was just looking. I opened the top drawer. There were receipts, folders, a small leather notebook. I opened the notebook. There were names, phone numbers, dates, dollar amounts in her handwriting. 2 pages in, there was an entry with a name I didn't recognize, followed by a number, and the word consult with a check mark next to it, then another name, then a project address in Nashville, Tennessee. I put the notebook down exactly where I'd found it, and I left the room. I called my brother that night. He's an attorney, civil litigation, not family law, but he knew people. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Don't touch anything. Don't move anything. Don't confront her. Give me 48 hours. I gave him 48 hours. What he came back with was a family law attorney named Brenda Castellano and a forensic accountant named Russell. And the news that the document Raymond Holt's handwriting consultant had flagged was almost certainly going to be considered fraud. Mortgage fraud, the kind that carried real consequences. My wife didn't know any of this was happening. She came home that night and the night after and made dinner, asked about the boys, asked about the Hendricks job we'd been bidding on, and I answered her. I looked at her across the table, and I answered her questions, and I passed the salt. And I said goodnight, and I lay in the dark after she fell asleep, and I thought about 14 months. I thought about all the mornings I left the house not knowing. I thought about the oak tree in the backyard. Russell took 3 weeks. He was thorough in a way that made me grateful and sick in equal measure. When he sat down with me and my attorney and spread everything out, the picture was complete, and it was ugly. $238,000 from the equity line. Of that, approximately $90,000 had gone directly into the LLC as operating capital. Another $60,000 had gone to a property in Nashville, a commercial unit, a studio space of some kind, co-owned with her partner. The remaining $88,000 was distributed across a period of 14 months, in amounts small enough to avoid automatic reporting flags. Some of it had gone to personal expenses, travel, restaurants, clothing, a piece of jewelry that had been purchased in Nashville in March that I had never seen her wear. There was more. Russell had dug into the household accounts, the ones I'd trusted her to manage, and found patterns going back further than the equity line. Cash withdrawals here, transfers there. Nothing as dramatic as the LLC, but consistent. Small rivers flowing somewhere I hadn't looked. Over 5 years, by his estimate, somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 in household funds that had moved in ways that had no corresponding expense in our life together. I thought about the years we'd spent talking about college funds, retirement, whether we could afford to take the boys to Europe before they left home. My attorney filed on a Wednesday morning. I had arranged for the boys to be at my mother's house that afternoon. I was home when my wife got back from wherever she'd been. She came in through the garage, and I was sitting at the kitchen table. There was a copy of the filing on the table in front of the chair across from me. She looked at it. She looked at it. She said, "What is this?" "Sit down," I said. She sat down slowly. I told her I knew about the equity line. I told her I knew about the LLC. I told her I knew about Nashville. I told her I knew about the 5 years before that. I kept my voice level. I wasn't angry, or I was, but it was very far away, behind thick glass, and I could manage it. She didn't deny it. That surprised me more than almost anything else. She sat very still, and she didn't deny it. After a long moment, she said, "I was going to tell you." When? She didn't answer. "The business was going to do well," she said eventually. "I was going to pay it back. with money that wasn't yours to take. We're married. It's both of ours. The signature on the equity line application isn't mine. That's fraud. That's not a marital disagreement about finances. That's a crime. She went very pale. I told her that my attorney would be in contact with hers. I told her I was filing on grounds that included financial fraud and dissipation of marital assets. I told her that the forensic accountant's report would be submitted to the court. And I told her that I had forwarded the relevant documents to the county DA's office, not to make a decision for them, but because I felt I was obligated to. She called me a name then. Several names. She told me I was doing this out of spite. She told me she'd given me the best years of her life. She stood up and knocked the chair back, and she said, "You're going to destroy me." I looked at her for a moment. At this person I'd been next to for 16 years. At the person I thought I knew. "You did this," I said. "Not me. You." She stayed in a hotel that night. I don't know which one. I didn't ask. The legal process took 8 months. There are things I can say, and things that are still in the domain of settlement agreements, and things I just don't have the right words for yet. What I can tell you is this. The equity line was voided by the court on the basis of the fraudulent signature. The lender's claim was redirected to my wife's assets, which were substantial because Russell had done his job well and identified everything. The LLC, Renata Creative Group, was found to have been capitalized in part with fraudulently obtained funds, and her partner, who had known she was married and had, according to discovery documents, known the source of some of the capital, was named in a civil suit that is still ongoing. She did not receive the house. She did not receive any portion of my business. She received a settlement structured around what remained of her own legitimate assets, which were less than she'd expected because Russell had found all of it. I got the house. I got the oak tree. I got to be the one to explain to my boys, as gently and as honestly as I could, that their mother and I were no longer going to be married. That was the hardest conversation of my life. Harder than anything in that diner with Raymond Holt. Harder than sitting across the kitchen table from my wife. My younger son cried and didn't say anything, and my older one, who's 17 and doesn't miss much, said, "Dad, I knew something was wrong. I'm glad you know now too." I think about that a lot. There's a thing people say about betrayal. That the hardest part is that you trusted someone, that you opened a door for them, and they walked in and took something. I've thought about it differently. The hardest part for me wasn't the money. It wasn't even the affair, though that hurt in its own particular way. The hardest part was the parallel life, the version of my marriage that had existed only in my head, the one where we were partners, where the arrangement was mutual, where the trust went both ways. That version was fiction, and I'd been living in it for years without knowing. There's a freedom in knowing. Eventually, a terrible freedom. Because you can't unknow it, but you also can't be deceived by it anymore. You're standing on the ground. The ground is real. Whatever you build on it from here will be real too. Raymond Holt sent me a card after the settlement came through. Handwritten, short. It said he was glad it had worked out. It said he hoped I was doing well. I have it on the windowsill above my kitchen sink, propped against the glass, because I pass it every morning and it reminds me that sometimes the truth comes from the strangest directions. Sometimes the person paid to watch you is the one who decides you deserve to know what's actually happening to you. I'm still in the house in Crestwood. The oak tree is still there. My boys are still here, on their weekends, their shoes by the door, cereal bowls in the sink, life filling the rooms the way life does when you let it. Pete still works for me. The Hendricks job came through. I have a new account at a bank I chose myself, and I check it every month. I don't hate her. I want to be clear about that. Hate is a weight I decided not to carry. She made the choices she made. I made mine. I'm still standing. That's enough. I've thought about the sequence of events a lot since everything settled. Not obsessively, I'm past that, but in the quiet way you think about something when you're trying to understand how the pieces fit. My wife set something in motion the day she decided to hire Raymond Holt. She wanted evidence against me. She wanted a file, a reason, something she could use. What she got instead was a mirror pointed back at herself. That's not poetic justice in some grand design sense. It's just the way things actually work when you build your life on something false. Eventually, the structure shows the cracks. Eventually, somebody notices. I didn't do anything to cause what happened to her. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I didn't scheme. I didn't plan. I went to work. I came home, I coached baseball on Saturdays, I had lunch with my father every other Wednesday. That was my life, my honest life. And it turned out that living honestly is its own kind of protection. Not a guarantee, not armor, but a foundation that holds when everything else starts shifting. What I've learned about trust is that it's not a feeling. I used to think it was. I trusted my wife the way you trust the floor to be solid when you step on it. You don't think about it, you just step. But trust is actually a decision you make based on evidence you're paying attention to. I stopped paying attention. I handed over the accounts and I didn't ask questions because asking felt like suspicion, and suspicion felt like a failure of the marriage. That was my mistake, not a moral failure. A practical one. Oversight is not a character flaw, but refusing to look when you have good reason to is. Russell was the one who taught me that. He sat across from me in my attorney's office, and he walked me through 5 years of transactions with the patience of someone who understands that numbers are just behavior written down. Every transfer told a story. Every withdrawal was a decision someone made. He showed me that the truth had always been there in the records, waiting. It wasn't hidden as cleverly as she thought. It was just that no one had looked. I think about what it took to do what she did for as long as she did it. The sustained effort, the compartmentalization, the daily performance of a normal marriage while running something entirely different underneath it. That kind of intelligence misdirected is genuinely impressive in a terrible way. She was disciplined and organized and persistent. Those are real qualities. She just spent them on the wrong thing, in the wrong direction for reasons I'll probably never fully understand. My older son said something to me during that conversation. The hard one, the one I'd been dreading, that I still carry with me. He said, "Dad, I knew something was wrong. I'm glad you know now too." He's 17. He'd been watching. Kids notice more than we give them credit for. He didn't have the language for it, but he had the instinct. I think about that and I think, keep your instincts sharp. Don't let comfort make you slow. Don't let love make you blind. I'm not bitter. I checked for bitterness and I didn't find it. What I found instead was a kind of clarity. The particular clarity that comes from having something false stripped away. The marriage I thought I had was partly real and partly something I'd been projecting onto a person who wasn't quite the person I imagined. Knowing that is not a wound. It's just information. And information, even the hard kind, is always better than the alternative. Raymond Holt didn't have to call me. He had the retainer. He could have delivered nothing, closed the file, moved on. He chose differently. I keep his card on the windowsill, not as a reminder of the worst year of my life, but as a reminder that people will sometimes do the right thing when it costs them something. That's worth remembering too.